Hello, everybody. Welcome to Proud Women Live. I'm sorry we're a couple of minutes late. We had some technical errors. My webcam just decided to stop working on me, so that's all good just when you're about to do a live broadcast. So we've resorted to the crappy built-in camera. But I'm going to shut up for a minute. I think you probably already know that I'm Taz Thornton. I'm going to ask my guests to introduce themselves. And let's go in alphabetical order because I can't just say Katie.
So hi, everybody. Yep, Katie Allen Consulting. Delighted to be here. I'm a specialist diversity, equity and inclusion consultant coach, and I'm proudly repping today for the asexuals out there.
Woo! And I'm sure we'll have a discussion about that because there's loads of people who just don't have a clue what asexuality is.
Myself included until a few years ago. So yeah.
Okay, well that's a story we can
talk about that.
Sure. Excellent. Okay, let's go to Katie B.
Oh, thank you. Katie Brown, very good to be with all of you here today. Who am I repping? Curly-haired queers? I don't know. I'm 20 years in the corporate world. I spent the first part, almost half of my career being not out at work and then out with colleagues, but not out with clients because I was terrified it would cost me business. So I spend a lot of my time now helping other people navigate that. And I've also recently become a trustee with African Rainbow Family. So really delighted to be with you all here today.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And finally, our gobby trans woman, Katie Neeves.
Oh, you've just taken the wind out of myself. I was going to say,
sorry.
I'm just a gobby trans woman. Oh, delete. Oh, it's going live, isn't it? Oh, yeah. That was a good start, wasn't it, Taz? Thank you. Well, yeah, I'm just a gobby trans woman. There we go. So my name's Katie Neeves, and I'm the founder and director of Cool to Be Trans. So I do trans awareness training and inspirational speaking. But I've been a photographer and filmmaker for the last 36 years. And then 5 years ago, I came out very publicly as being transgender after living life as a man for 48 years. I'm so much happier now. I'm much better now. Definitely.
Excellent. And just before we went on air, she told us how much she loves her boobs, and they were very expensive. So I think that's, we were
talking about puppies, weren't we?
we were talking about puppies.
What did you mean? Yeah. So did you mean something different?
No, I must have got terribly confused there.
Definitely were.
Which brings us nicely onto the topic of tonight, doesn't it? Because if we kick off with a lot of people out there,
we're all a fan.
We're all a fan. We all love puppies. Everybody here loves puppies. If you don't love
them, can you?
You might be watching the wrong stream. Who do I know? How do I know?
I didn't realise it was going to be that type of show.
I think it's probably going to degenerate into that kind of show pretty quickly.
If this is where we've started,
it's going to.
Yeah. I think we've set the bar.
I'm only on water. I haven't gone on to the gin yet. I think maybe.
Yeah. I don't even drink. I'm just drunk.
I think next time, on the next one, should we all get on the gin?
Oh, we should do, and take a sip every time somebody says a particular word.
Yeah.
Oh.
Could be dangerous, couldn't it?
Pretend. It could be. But let's circle back around to what we were just talking about with confusion. I think there's a lot of confusion out there about why we still need a Pride Month, why we still need Pride events. I'm sure we will all have heard things like, well, when's straight Pride? Or why do you still need one? It's all okay now. You've got everything you need. So let's just open up with that. So for anyone watching, if you have any questions, comments, observations, keep it clean and nice, then drop them in the comments and we will pop them through onto the screen and answer those many as we can. If you haven't given StreamYard permissions, you might pop up without your name. So you might want to click to do that, but otherwise we'll answer as best we can. But let me throw this open to the room in whatever order you like. Why do we still have a Pride Month? Why do we still need one in 2023?
Shall I dump in? Dump in.
Yes, you can dump. You see, we've started. We can dump in. Puppies and dumping. There's the theme.
We'll start again, shall we?
Go on, Katie.
Oh dear, I'm as red as the sofa. There we go. So yeah, the thing is, there is so much hate and misinformation that's still out there, and there's still a third of the world, it's still illegal to be within the LGBTQIA plus community. And I think it's 11 countries, there's still the death penalty for it. And if you look at the Commonwealth countries, I think it's something 29 of the Commonwealth countries, about half of the Commonwealth countries, it's still illegal to be LGBTQIA plus. I mean, it's outrageous, isn't it, in 2023? So that is why, straight people don't need a pride because they've already got all these rights. We're still fighting for the rights. I mean, yes, We've gained a lot of rights, but they're hanging on a thread. They are in danger, particularly with trans rights. I mean, we'll probably talk about that a little bit more later on. But we are really, really in danger of losing them at the moment. It's dire, and Pride is a protest, and it's been in danger of being overtaken by just being a carnival.
Yeah,
but it's not. It's a protest, and it absolutely still needs to be.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you, Katie, as well. And I'd build on that to say, if we have to remember the origins of Pride, like it was, the Stonewall riots in 1969, I think it was, wasn't it? Like,
Yeah,
because there were, I think it's police officers that were trying to check the gender of people in a bar. And it's like, that's not okay. It's never been okay. And it should never be okay. And it was the following year then that obviously that Pride began as a way to remember why these conversations are so important. And this is why Pride has continued. It's the fact that we need to constantly remind that people's rights haven't always been what they are today, and they can be eroded. Not in the same way that if you're heterosexual, that you don't have to worry about that. It's the norm. And that's what we need to be really conscious of. So yes, I mean, it is great that we should be celebrating, we should be doing all these things, but it has its origins, doesn't it, firmly in it's serious stuff.
Yeah,
it really is. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Katie B, what do you reckon?
Well, do you know what? It's great having two other Katies, because I completely agree with what you both said. But I think sometimes our allies are our worst friends when it comes to Pride, because if I think about Section 28 having been repealed, we will all have grown up being told either you mustn't discuss that or it's just a phase. And I don't take for granted the fact that we've got the Marriage Same-Sex Couples Act from 2013, that there is now a path to being parents for people who want to have children who are not heterosexual. But I almost feel like for a lot of people, and excuse the squeaking in the background if you can hear it, I feel like for a lot of people, they were kind of the pinnacle rights, that once the LGBTQIA community had those, then that was sort of enough and we'd stopped there. And Katie Allen, to your point, rights aren't just being eroded around the world and with all the countries that is actually still punishable by the death penalty. And I've constantly travelled with work and really I'm respectful of other cultures, but it's horrible when you travel and think, I want to be respectful of your culture. I also don't want to think that if I am myself, I might end up in prison or dead. And I think those are things that you carry with you when you are not heterosexual as a day-to-day basis. And I think it's important that people remember that. So I actually think it's also important that Pride is a parade and that it is something that encourages people to come and celebrate, because, and Katie Neeves, I think it was you that said this when we were chatting earlier on today, for some people, Pride might feel like it's too political. And if it does feel too political, I would encourage you to stop and be curious for a moment as to why you think that, and remember what privilege you've got. And us as well, all of us are on this call, although I will identify as mixed race, I have white privilege. Everything we have is even worse when you look at intersectionality in terms of rights. And I think that's why it feels more political for people that don't think about it day in and day out.
Yeah. It's more than just laws, though, isn't it? And you touched on that beautifully there, Katie. And it's one of the points I often raise when people say, well, you've got this law and that law and that. You can even adopt now. Even. You can even get married, Is that when you are not gay, when you identify as heterosexual, when was the last time you stopped before booking a holiday to say, am I okay to book a holiday here? And if you're going with your partner, are we okay to book a double room, or do we need to book a twin or separate rooms with an adjoining door? When was the last time you stopped when you were out and about and gave it a second thought before you reached down to grab your partner's hand or just show any affection? And have you ever been out, let's say just in a shopping centre, and thought, we're walking a bit too close together, let's just step apart a little bit? Because I know a lot of you listening are going to think that's ridiculous in today's day and age, but it does happen. A few years back, I gave a TED talk and I called it A Dangerous Rainbow. And I talked about what I refer to as the liberal blind spot. And this is where Katie B was saying sometimes allies they could be better. And it's because you all assume that everything's okay because in your value set, well, so what? But when we are surrounded by social channels and algorithms that constantly put us into bubbles with people who think the same way that we think. And when we might choose to watch news channels or read media that aligns with our views, we don't realize there's still a massive issue. You know, we don't realize that hate crime has actually been going up consistently year by year, and it got a lot worse after Brexit, crazily enough. We don't see it because we're such great allies. We don't see it because we're such great allies and we align ourselves with other allies. And therefore we have this massive liberal blind spot. So take Peterborough. I live not too far from Peterborough, literally Middle England, or Middle Earth, as I sometimes affectionately refer to it. And it was only a couple of years back, maybe a couple of years before lockdown. Is that a thing now? We're not saying before lockdown, you know. And Asher and I were walking through the city centre, and we literally just grasped hands for a couple of seconds. And we were then followed around for, I don't know how long it was. It could have been 10 minutes, but it felt like an hour. We were followed around literally by a couple of women quoting scripture behind us.
God.
You know, we had to dip into a shop to try and shake them off, a la some kind of spy movie. I also had a situation in Peterborough where I was taking part in a free hugs event, again, obviously before lockdown. Nothing to do with LGBTQIA, nothing to do with alphabet soup, just normal free hugs. And a big muscly guy somehow must have clocked the body language between Asher and I. And he somehow managed to kind of separate me from the crowd, back me up against the wall of a shop round the corner where nobody could see me, and start lecturing me on morality. So Peterborough, you know, so for everyone out there who says, why do we still need a Pride event? I'm the first one to remind people of the politics, to remind people that even regardless of our of the colour of our skin, we have huge privilege just by being in this country, if we are part of the LGBTQIA community. All the time, there are people who cannot be themselves, who are being murdered, tortured, jailed, being subjected to corrective rape. We have an issue. And also, let's not forget that even though we are in the UK, there are still people all over this country who will be waking up wondering if they should still be staying alive that day because they fear they won't be accepted.
Yep.
And I think that's just a stark reminder that, yeah, absolutely. I agree with KTB too. Pride should be a celebration, but we should be celebrating how far we've come, celebrating the fact that we are able to still have these events, and celebrating the fact that we are making a little bit of a difference every year. We shouldn't ever just see it as purely to go a little bit low, a little bit base. We shouldn't ever just see it as a piss up and a show fest, because it isn't. Well, there's a whole generation now who grew up without Section 28 who wonder what the hell us old people are talking about.
Yeah,
and we need to remember.
I would add to that. I think it's also not. It's not an opportunity. I'm pleased that there's so much corporate funding to make events available. It's not an opportunity to adorn your employees with pride flags and beautifully coloured T-shirts unless you're doing something about policy all year round. So I don't mean that companies shouldn't be there representing, but for me, the two things have to go hand in hand. And I have been asked in a previous life to go and represent a company after having been told that policies were going to follow afterwards. And well, anybody who knows me knows what my answer to that was. And it's just not the right way. And I think it's too easy for it to happen, because actually, who doesn't want to go and celebrate? But it's really important that we say things like, no, I'm not going to celebrate if all you're going to give me is cookies and stickers, and not a policy to recognise the mental health crisis and all the other things that we just talked about that perhaps your colleagues are facing at work on a day-to-day basis. Particularly, you know, we live in a really global economy now. So just because your colleagues are in the UK doesn't mean that their family are not suffering these things, or their friends are not suffering these things abroad.
Yeah, I mean, and it's not just the countries that we might stereotypically think of, is it? I mean, look at what's happening in Florida right now. You know,
we were just discussing actually at work the Don't Say Gay law, and I felt like I'd gone back to the mid-80s. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah,
so
and trans people as well being forcibly detransitioned over there as well. It's just horrendous. You know, having their medication stopped and everything for HRT. It's just horrendous, absolutely horrendous. And we're in danger of going down that route here as well, to be honest. With the way things are going. There's a current threat to the Equality Act 2010. There's going to be a debate in Parliament on Monday, the 12th. In fact, I spoke to my MP's assistants today. Two of them, I couldn't get an appointment with my MP before the 12th. Surprise, surprise. He could offer me one after the 12th, but not before. So I managed to speak to his assistants and gave them a thorough briefing. And so they're going to brief him. And then I've asked to speak to him as soon as I can after the debate. I hope he does say something. I hope he does do something. But I'm not holding my breath, but we'll see how it goes. But we are in great danger at the moment.
And just to build on that, Kate, actually, just in case the MP for Huntingdonshire is listening, you still have some unread emails from me in your inbox, because I have not yet received any responses from you to any of the things that I've sent to you. So if anybody from his team is listening, go and have a little look, please, because it's been 3 years and I would like to get some response.
Yeah, well said.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Well, I find that so often when I write to my MP, I get a response eventually, but it's just a stock response straight from Tory HQ, and it's just and it's just the same, because I know that that's the case, because I get it copied in on emails from other people. So other trans people contact me and they say, "Oh, this is the response I got from my MP," and word for word, it's the same as the one that my MP sent me. They might just change a few words just here and there, but they don't actually address the things that I actually
like your name.
Yeah, exactly. Things like my name. Yeah, or you, and so it's just the same stuff, and so then they don't actually address what I've actually asked them. So then I write back to them and say, well, actually, can you please answer these things, these points that I've made? And then I don't get a reply. That's happened every time I've written to him.
Yeah, I've never had a response.
No,
never.
Can we touch a little bit, or maybe a lot, on some of the issues in the media around trans awareness right now? Because I've found, and I know Katie Neeves, we've spoken about this before, as a former journalist, I have found myself absolutely appalled at the way some in the media are currently handling what they referred to as the trans agenda, for goodness sake.
Or the trans debate.
Yeah.
It's not a debate. It's my identity.
It just is.
Yeah.
But one of the points I would love to touch on is how they seem to be managing to find all these young people who are now detransitioning. And I know you came up with some really fascinating insights on that last time we spoke about it. So can we just open this up a little bit? Because there are an awful lot of people who are, I'm sure, very well-meaning, but are living in a bubble of ignorance, largely created by social media, who really do think that kids are being forced to transition by woke parents, and then they're having to go back the other way. And there are people out there who still believe that kids are actually being given sex change operations before the age of consent. So can we just blow a bit of that BS out of the water?
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the things that people often talk about. It's the usual things, either that or sport, or access to same, bogs as well. They like talking about bogs.
Yeah.
It's all there. It's like, reel it off. Here we go again. It's just ridiculous. I mean, the thing is that with whatever, so we're talking about, if we talk about operations for surgery, there's always going to be a certain number of people, a certain percentage of people who will regret certain surgery. But when you look at the numbers of people and the percentage of people who regret having gender reassignment surgery, it's far lower than the occurrences of regret for people who've had, say, hip operations.
Oh wow, I didn't know that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You
don't see that in the media.
No, in terms of just the surgery. The thing is that people actually don't actually, and obviously transition isn't just about surgery anyway. There's a whole load of things. There's social transition, then there's hormonal transition, and then the surgical transition. So and not all trans people do all the different steps and stages, because often we find that, because the whole purpose of transition is to alleviate the distress caused by gender dysphoria. And what that is, it's a great feeling of unease and distress caused by a mismatch between how we feel in our head and our heart, our gender identity, as opposed to our primary sex characteristics, what was between our legs and the label that we were given at birth on a birth certificate. And it can vary in intensity, and it very often increases over time. And that's exactly what happened with me. And so the whole purpose is to alleviate that distress. And so often trans people will start on their journey, on their transition journey, and then they'll take a few steps and stages, and then they get to a point where that they're happy and that they no longer feel that distress. And so if they're happy and they don't have the gender dysphoria anymore, then why put themselves through really invasive surgery needlessly? They don't. So they stop. And so that's why not all trans people go through all the steps and stages that are available. And then when we look at and to actually get on that pathway in the first place is really arduous. It's a really long and painful journey to actually get there. So people that it's not right for fall by the wayside usually before they even start. And a few people might slip through the net, and you're always going to get that, but the occurrences of regret are absolutely minuscule, and they really are. And the main reason for people detransitioning is the pressure put on them by other people, usually by their loved ones. It's things like the fear of losing their partner through it. And I know there I've been there. I have lost my partner through that. I've lost my sister through it as well, and had big problems with my mum through it as well. Families are really problematical, and so usually it's the pressure that's put on them by others, and then the most common outcome of detransition is retransition. Because they sort of say, okay, right, well, I'll do this for you. I'll stop my transition, for you, and then they just can't live themselves any longer. And then they then have to go back and transition again. I hear this time and time again. So many people say, oh, I tried to transition many years ago, 10 years ago, but then then I couldn't, and come back again. It's so common, so common. It's very sad as well.
Massively. We've got a comment here from Ellen saying Casey had to wait 7 years and had to be assessed by 2 people before he could even be put forward for surgery.
Yeah.
And Ellen wrote a post on LinkedIn. I think it was yesterday, Ellen, forgive me if I'm wrong, talking about her son Casey's journey, and had the most appalling foul languaged response to it on LinkedIn, of all places.
Oh, I've had it on LinkedIn too.
Katie Neeves, I have to say, I don't think I realised just how much abuse you have to deal with on a day-to-day basis on, Twitter, actually, until I'd shared something of yours, and I just thought, oh gosh, if anybody out there has no idea, share a post supporting the trans community and have one. It blows. Well, it would be enough for me to remove myself from Twitter if I had to deal with that on a daily basis.
I've had to develop quite a thick skin. In fact, a very thick skin quite quickly, to be honest. And in the early days, it was really distressing because nobody's prepared for that. No, nobody normally has abuse thrown at them all the time and being called regularly being called a paedophile and a predator and a sex pest and stuff like that. And this is the stuff. These are the sort of things that were thrown at gay men back in the 70s and 80s, and now it's being thrown at trans women. It's always trans women that's being thrown at. And it's just so completely wrong. And the thing is that it's so ridiculous because you couldn't find a less sexual group of people than trans women, particularly pre-op trans women, because we've all
apart from Katie Allen. Yeah.
Well, but because we've all been, trans people, they've either been chemically castrated or this is trans women, or surgically castrated. So it's just ridiculous. So saying that we're predators and sex pests and all that is just like absolutely ridiculous. It removes all those sexual urges and everything. So it just couldn't be further from the truth. And so I think it needs to be said, and it needs to be said more often. And so I get all this abuse at me all the time, but I'm not alone. Every trans person who puts their head above the parapet gets it.
Yeah.
And I remember when in the early days, and the first pylon I got, it was really traumatic. But now my coping strategy, I actually use as a really good plugin for Chrome called Shinigami Eyes. I don't know if any of you have heard of it. It's a weird name. Shinigami Eyes. It's a brilliant app, and what it is, it's a plugin for Chrome. So it only works when you view social media through Chrome. And what it does, it highlights posts from known trans hostile people in red and from known trans friendly people in green, and it's brilliant, and it's user generated. So if I see something that's trans hostile from somebody and they're not highlighted in either, then I can highlight them in red, or conversely in green for somebody that's trans friendly. And so it's one of these things that's self-perpetuating, and it's brilliant. Absolutely, it means that if I view my Twitter feed or whatever through Chrome, I can one glance at it. If it's a sea of red, I know it's one of those days that I'm being piled on, and all I do is I scroll past and land on something green, and I have a nice day. Go and have a nice gin and tonic, and then I don't have to look at all that rubbish. So yes, there's lots of stuff out there that's said about me which I haven't counted. Well, I don't care. I mean, people never used to have strong opinions about me before my transition. Now people either love me or hate me. Well, I don't really care about the people who hate me, because you can't please all the people all the time. They're not my tribe. I care about the people who love me, and to everybody else. So,
and anyway, it's a mindset that's worked very well for Marmite, hasn't it? Yeah,
exactly. Yeah,
it's awful, and the whole connecting to paedophilia thing, I don't think that's going to be going away anytime soon. And although we don't want to be going into the kind of gossip in the press at the moment, I think we've only got to take a second to look at how quickly the storm came down very negatively on Philip Schofield, because of what had been going on with his brother. If the story had not broken about his brother, would we be making such a big deal of this, or would we be just saying it's a couple of guys with a big age gap who had a fling? And I don't know, but that whole argument, that old outdated argument, comes up time and time again. Apologies for the dog barking, everyone. For those of you who don't know, we've got a new puppy and she's creating a little bit of livable chaos. So what can we do, given that, again, so many in the media are seemingly coming up with an angle and then finding the needle in the haystack, rather than actually finding a story and then finding people who are visible and there to comment? What do we do? How do we start to turn the tide?
It's education, isn't it? It's got to be education and storytelling. I think storytelling is the most powerful thing you can do, and amplify other people's stories. When you hear things, and when you see the social media posts and all that, amplify them. Okay, yes, I know you might get a bit of abuse for doing it, but please do it, because to do nothing is to side with the oppressor, isn't it?
It's also about recognizing what is a trans hostile comment, isn't it? Because some of them are quite clever and kind of hidden in plain sight.
And
some are accidental, aren't they? Because some people don't realise, because, like you said, their lack of education, they blunder into something and don't actually realise what they've said might have consequences.
I think, look, Katie, I think stories are great, and actually, you said at the beginning, people always talk about bog sport, and this is your sort of three key topics. And if anyone ever challenges me on having trans women in toilets, I point out to them that I've got so many gay friends who won't go into a busy public toilet unless somebody who looks womanly enough goes in with them, because they get abuse all the time. There seems to be this new rule that we're all allowed to tell other people where they're allowed to be when they're just trying to go around their business. And I think if I think back to the first customer I came out to at work, when I was on that terrifying, is this going to cost me my business and am I going to get sacked? The way I knew he was a safe space is he just went on to tell me about one of his nieces who transitioned. And I thought, oh, well, if I'd known that about you, I'd have known you were okay. So it was really little things like that. And I think sometimes if you just share those stories, there's a time to get political with people and tell them that they're being ignorant or bigoted. And sometimes there's just a time to tell them a story and watch their reaction and realize, okay, I haven't been exposed to this before, I'm wrong. And that sometimes is, I don't want to say that kill with kindness, but I think there is a time when that's the best way to get allies on board, and then mobilize them to actually help you drown out the hatred that Katie has to deal with and other trans women have to deal with on a daily basis.
And even if they don't immediately come to the point of I'm wrong, if it at least gets them to the point where they recognise they might need to research a little bit more and think a bit deeper, that's on the way to a win.
But I think that point, sorry, Katie and Alan, but the point that Katie sort of just made just now about about there's a lot of cisgender butch lesbian people that they get so much abuse, and just because they've got a more masculine appearance. And I've got lots of friends who are butch lesbians but they're cisgender, and they get a lot of abuse. And I've been very lucky that I haven't had any abuse using the ladies' loos, but I do change my behaviour when I use them. I either don't speak or I speak very quietly, because I'm very conscious that I've still got a deep voice. A bit of a cold at the moment, so it's even deeper. But I'm very conscious of that, and I don't want to make any other women using the facilities feel threatened by my presence. But at the same time, I don't want to be subjected to any abuse.
No.
But for any women who've got a more masculine appearance, they get abused all the time. And with this anti-trans rhetoric that's being whipped up by the government and the media at the moment, it's only going to make it worse, because it empowers the transphobes and to think that they can always tell. And no, it's awful. It's really awful, and it's only going to get worse.
Yeah.
Sorry, Katie Allen, I jumped
No,
in.
there was something that came up, actually. Two things now you said that, but the first thing was, so Katie Neeves has done a number of sessions for my allyship training, and without a doubt, the feedback that comes back is phenomenal, and it's usually from people saying, "I had no idea. And it is that lack of education, and as you were saying, Katie B, though, sometimes it is just knowing, having that window open to go, oh gosh, like I really do need to go and have a think about this. And the amount of, especially I think on the first session at the allyship for men, they were absolutely blown away. Like, we had no idea this was just a world we didn't know existed. And for them, they still talk about it. And we're now 18 months on, and they still talk about you, Katie, and the impact that you've had. And for me, that's the important piece. It's just having that moment of like, oh gosh, just a person, just a person, a person. And and then to Bill, like, so then you went on to Sam, like, actually, like, why do we get so hung up on like peeing? Like, we all, like, in our houses, we all have gender neutral toilets. I assume, I do, and I don't care. I don't care who I'm peeing around. Quite frankly, anyone. I care if someone's going to harm me. How do I know that? Because of their gender? I don't. I know it at the point it happens, and unfortunately, that could happen. That can happen anywhere. That's not about gender. That's not about anything. That's just about predatory people.
And when you look at the stats, there are far more cisgender female sex offenders than there are trans women sex offenders. When you look at it, so it's ridiculous.
And for the amount of people who say, well, they don't know because they've never met a trans person, how do you know? You might well.
This is the point, and so many people haven't knowingly met a trans person. They will have met loads. And often people sort of say, oh, well, there are far more trans women than trans men. But that's not actually the case. It's probably about the same sort of amount. It's just that we're much more visible, because trans men generally tend to do this in stealth because they can. They're very lucky in that their voices break very quickly after being on testosterone. I wish it was the other way around, but it's not. So they have it a lot easier with their voices. They have it much harder with their surgery, but they have it easier with their voices than trans women. And they tend to grow beards, moustaches, and everything. So which masculinize them straight away. So most trans men, you would have no idea to look at them or to hear them that they are trans, and so they can just go in stealth and live their lives with under the radar. Whereas for many trans women, we don't have that luxury. And I'm very lucky in that when I walk down the street, I don't think people realize I'm trans. I mean, when I open my mouth to speak, they probably realize, but when they see me, they probably don't. So I get less hassle than a lot of my trans women friends who have got a much more masculine appearance. And they're just as female as I am.
I think one of the points to remember with trans guys, for anyone out there thinking, well, trans men must have it much easier, then we need to remember the mental and emotional health implications as well. I remember having quite a long discussion with one of my trans friends who is a trans man. He was talking about how awfully misplaced he felt afterwards, because of course he had previously identified as a butch lesbian and then recognized that he was actually trans and went through the surgery, and now all of a sudden he felt that he no longer fit with all his friends who were lesbians. He didn't feel like he fit with men. His marriage broke down because his former partner identified as a gay woman, and now all of a sudden she's essentially with a heterosexual man.
Yeah.
And so it's very, very easy to have a kind of quick broad brush thought and do a case of it's all right for them. It's not all right for any of us.
That's right. And that's interesting. It's because that's like the opposite for me. Because I've always been, and I think that's a really good point, just to point out that sexuality and gender are completely separate entities and they're not linked. Who you are has got absolutely nothing to do with who you're attracted to, and that's it. That's it. So I've always been attracted to women, and I still am. So previously, I was classed as a heterosexual man. Now I'm classed as a lesbian. Feels no different to me at all. I'm just attracted to women. That's all it is. But a lot of people got mixed up with it, especially when I first came out. People were, because they thought of me as a heterosexual man previously, all of a sudden, as soon as I announced my transition, they assumed that I would then be attracted to men, but I'm not.
Yeah. Interesting point Ellen's making, that it's surprising how many people still don't understand what transgender actually means. And I'm sure we will have all at some point have heard somebody using an inappropriate word through ignorance and corrected them. Why is there still so much misunderstanding for people? Why do people still not understand what transgender actually is and what it means?
I think a lot of it is that, you know, they a lot of them believe what's fed to them in the media. And, you know, and there is so much misinformation that's put out there, and they do actually believe the stuff that's written in the Daily Mail and the Daily Telegraph and the Times, the Sunday Times and the Daily Telegraph, and, you know, I could go on. Probably will go on. Yeah, you know, GB News, Talk TV, Talk Radio. Oh, so,
I've been caught by Talk Radio. So, that was
People don't understand what isn't normal to them, right? And I think, you know, Taz, I've said this to you before. I don't watch soaps, but I also don't think we can underestimate how, when a storyline becomes mainstream in a soap opera, whether that's a British one or Australian one, something that is watched by tens of millions of people, how that then starts changing people's minds. And Katie Neeves, you said, you know, that trans women today are being treated the way gay men were in the 80s. And I've said that. I know I've said that to friends before. I think the reality is that it's not normal enough for a lot of people who read and consume media from the publications you've just talked about in particular, or people who don't have any other people in their sphere of influence. So they just are frightened of what they don't understand and
if they do, there is a storyline, so that makes it different.
It's a fear of the unknown, definitely. Yeah.
And it doesn't mean it's your job to go and educate everybody, because yes, I know to some extent it is your job, but also that's exhausting. And I also remember you doing something a few years ago with my company, and you very boldly said, you can ask me any question. I'll never forget the reaction in the room. Everyone asked a question. You can ask me any question you like right now, even if you think it's going to be offensive, I will answer it. But I will also tell you if you're never to ask another trans person that question because it's offensive, and I'll explain why. And I thought, what a great way of handling it. A lot of people don't have the luxury of that.
No, I still have that policy where people can ask me absolutely anything. There's never been a question that I've refused to answer. I spoke to 500 teenagers the other day in a school, and they asked me what everyone was thinking. So I answered.
Good for teenagers.
Rishi Sunak has got it wrong when he says that 100% of women don't have a penis. They do. This is what everyone was thinking. Let's get it out there. Well, no, not literally.
No.
That would be wrong. That would be wrong.
So before or after you've dumped.
But what about pre-op trans people? Trans women. That absolutely have. Just because they've got a penis doesn't mean to say they want it, or that it has any function. It doesn't. I haven't had lower surgery yet. I'm still on the waiting list for it. When hell heals over, freezes over. Who knows? I've had top surgery, but it's not all about surgery. But I am on the waiting list, eventually. But and thing is that the language that's used by by people like the Prime Minister really doesn't help, and it discriminates against people like me, and it's really harmful. It really is. So there we go. It's out there, literally.
this taps into the debate that started to come up again last year, doesn't it? The whole stuff around the people who menstruate and the amount of people who were getting so het up about that. And again, I remember sitting down with a friend who could not understand why we weren't just saying women. And again, she was flabbergasted, I think would be a fair word. She had no clue whatsoever, again, because of all the misinformation around trans, around intersex, that just no clue. So I think really, I don't know what I think. I wish I could just grab the media and put them in a massive bag and shake them up and do a worldwide broadcast that is forced onto everybody's TV screen that I have to watch, or one of these that just explains to them why. Because I'm sure, like my friend, if somebody sat down and explained to them why that was appropriate and I wasn't, the majority of people would not be anywhere near as harsh. I choose to believe that. I might be wrong.
Yeah. And it is just that lack of it's the fear of the unknown, isn't it? I think that's what it is. And then once people realise that, trans people, I'm just a boringly ordinary person, but who's had an extraordinary journey to be happy. That's all it is. That's all it is.
Way of putting it. Beautiful. Yeah. Okay, so let's talk alphabet soup, because this is another thing that people get het up about, isn't it? Alphabet soup and pronouns. So let's start with alphabet soup. Should we explain to people what all the letters are and why they're important? Let's go to Katie Allen on this one.
Oh, yes, educational session.
Yes, let's do that.
I feel like we want to do like a, shall we go through it? So
let's look through the round window. Yeah.
Here's one I prepared earlier.
I'll do it on my board. But yeah, so if we have got LGBTQIA+, so we can always do a test as well for people in the comments as well, if anybody wants to drop in what they know of the letters. But I'll start slowly so you can get typing. But L, lesbian, women who love women. G, gay, men who love men. B, I've got to count now, haven't I? Yeah. Bisexual, men or women who love men or women. T, this is where we move away from sexuality and love, and we move into gender. So we've got transgender. And the opposite of that, if people will listen to our language, we've got transgender and we've got cisgender. So as Katie Neeves said, transgender, people who don't identify with the gender that they were assigned at birth. And cisgender, people who do. So that's the difference. It's nothing complicated or complex. That's it. LGBTQ, queer or questioning, depending on how someone feels about that. And actually, there was a really interesting conversation today on LinkedIn around the use of the word queer. So it's probably what we could pause here for a second and just maybe dig into that, because I think, those of us that, as you were saying, Katie B earlier, when you went to school, if it was not okay to talk about being gay, and the term queer was a really readily used horrifying slur, and it wasn't meant in the way I think that now people are reclaiming it and reusing it. So there's a real mix and blend, isn't there, of how people feel about it.
And there's definitely confusion about it, because that's one of the questions I was asked on BBC Radio a couple of days back. Is it okay to say queer now? I think the only way to tell is to check with somebody, isn't it? What do you prefer?
Yeah. I mean, my guide tends to be, so I don't care. So I will use it about myself, but I would never use it to refer to anyone else or the LGBTQIA community in general, unless it has been expressly used by the person I'm speaking to. So I wait for an invitation. If someone else uses it, I'll use it too. My cat agrees. She's shouting in the background. And I use it about myself, but I would never, ever presume to use it about anybody else. I don't know. What else do you think?
I think many of the younger generation have sort of taken it back now, haven't they? And so I still feel a bit uneasy about it, because I still remember the 70s and 80s of all that queer bashing, and it being a slur. And so I still find it difficult. But having said that, next week I'm going to be hosting the Queer Student Awards, and there's it's going to be So it's been turned into a much more positive thing, but there's still a lot in the back of my mind that I suppose just because of how old I am.
I'm a bit like you with that one,
can't it?
Yeah, it can. Our best mate, who's only a couple of years younger than me, I think. We're roughly the same age. Uses it all the time and happily identifies as queer. But again, I still have that little bit, like you, Katie Neeves, that little bit of. But then let's think of another word that a lot of people find triggering: dyke. I have no problem with the word dyke whatsoever. I will happily call myself a dyke. And just to confuse matters more, I would rather refer to myself as a gay woman than a lesbian.
So glad you said that.
Yeah, I prefer that term actually.
There's no right or wrong at all. I don't mind if somebody calls me a lesbian. It's no less accurate than saying I'm 5'6" with pink hair, but wouldn't be my preferred term. Again, because of all those stereotypes when I was growing up.
Yeah.
But the stereotypical thing around dyke, that felt like a reclaiming and didn't bother me.
But I think also the term lesbian tends to dehumanize people a bit, whereas when you've got a gay woman, you've got the woman bit in there that gives the human bit. It's like when people, it's like when people refer to a group of trans people as a load of transgenders.
Should that be a collective word?
Yeah.
That dehumanizes us. We're trans people or transgender people, or just people, really. But yeah. So that I think that's why.
Yeah.
So I don't like it when you hear something like, "Oh, let's hear it for the gays," because no, gay people. Put the word people in there. They're just people. Yeah.
Katie B, you were saying you were so glad I said that. Say more.
I think just because Katie L and I was sitting and thinking, and I think Taz, I've said this to you recently. There is, I just can't reclaim the word lesbian. There is, despite the fact that I've been out for almost 30 years, it has, for me, it has negative connotations. It feels like something that is a criticism of me, to the extent that I think, Taz, it's you, I was saying this to you, I was Googling something on a work laptop and I was typing in the word lesbian. I was like, oh God, it's going to trigger some kind of, it's going to trigger a firewall. And I had to stop. It was a split second. And I thought, what on earth do you think what's it going to trigger a firewall? Like, this is not a banned term, but that's somewhere deep in my psyche. It's derogatory, which is, I don't believe it, but I would always describe myself as a gay woman. And more recently queer, but I think that's probably because a lot of my friends identify as queer, and it felt not like a derogatory term, but I would be much more likely to say queer than lesbian.
And yet I know so many women, so many of my friends desperately want to be referred to as lesbian. And again, that's fine too, just because I don't feel as comfortable with self-identifying in that. It is a fact, but it wouldn't be my preferred term. I've got more comfortable with it over time, but that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with it. It's choice again, isn't it?
No.
Katie Allen, get us back on track.
Why we need pride, right? If we don't even know what we're comfortable with.
No.
You're I.
Yes, thank you.
Did you hear the cogs whirring then?
No, I was just scrolling through the chat to see if anybody was playing a game with us, but they're not. So that's a shame.
We'll get the messages later, I bet. I keep checking the channels. There are people watching, but not many people commenting. Oh, here we go.
Oh.
What's this one?
Oh, yes.
Pamela.
Just appeared on. Okay. Thank you very much, Pamela. Thanks, Pam. That means the world.
Oh, thank you, Pamela.
Great work, Pamela. And great work for doing it over on Instagram Live as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That's off to you. Cool.
Brilliant.
Intersex. Now I'm gonna make sure Katie News can check me this to make sure I'm getting the right terminology here as well, because for me, intersex, my understanding is people that are born with both primary sex characteristics. Would that be the right the sex organs?
Yeah. Would you like me to do a bit of a
yes, please
thing about it? Yeah,
Thank
no problem.
you.
Yeah, but that is great. So basically, it's not as straightforward as just XX and XY chromosomes, as we're all taught in biology classes at school. You can actually have up to 5 chromosomes and different combinations of them, and that's all perfectly normal, perfectly natural. So when a baby is born, the doctor or midwife looks between the legs of the baby, and depending on what they see, they have a choice as to what label to give it. And in this country, it's a binary choice, boy or girl. That's all they can put down. In some countries, there's not a requirement to put a sex of the baby down. And to be honest, I think that's the way to go. That's the best way to do it. But we're a long way from that in this country. I don't know if that will ever happen in my lifetime. I doubt it. In other countries, there's a choice of more than 2. So, for instance, in Germany, there's a choice of 3: boy, girl, or other. So that's a bit more progressive. But as I say, in this country, it's still a choice of two. But the trouble is with nature is it's very messy. It doesn't like binary things. It likes a whole range of things. And so many people have got this extra chromosome, and so they're what's called intersex. And there's different ways that it can be displayed. And one way that, as Katie Allen just said, is it could the genitalia could be nondescript. You couldn't tell which sex to label the baby as. And so often the way that they find out is by measuring how big it is, and if it's how big the genitalia is, and if it's over a certain length, then they classify that baby as a boy. And if it's below a certain length, then they classify them as a girl. Sometimes they can't work it out, in which case they actually give the choice to the parents. What sex do you want to bring the baby up as? Based on what? It's crazy. And then very often this is followed up by by plastic surgery on the genitals. So gender reassignment surgery on babies where there's been no consent because they're too young to consent. It's absolutely horrific. And this is still going on to this day on the NHS.
And yet that's okay, but if a young person wants to transition later on, there's an outcry.
Absolutely, and yet this is still going on. This is outrageous. And so that's one way that it can be displayed. Another way it can be displayed could be that the baby could have a vagina, but then they could also have internal testes. But because obviously ovaries and testes just made of the same stuff. It's the same thing, but just in different places, in innie rather than an outie. But of course, the internal testes aren't seen at birth, only the vagina is seen, and so that baby gets labelled as a girl. And it's often not until very much later on in life, when they're having internal scans for other medical reasons, that the internal testes are discovered and that they realise they're intersex. And this actually affects more people than you think. It's just under 2% of the population, which in this country is about the same number of people who've got ginger hair. Not necessarily the same people, so don't go pointing any fingers or anything. But you get the idea. It's enough to quantify it. That's enough, So and that's all perfectly normal, perfectly natural. So that's intersex.
Okay.
Perfect.
So back to A.
And then A, I can do this one confidently.
Specialist subject.
And A is for asexual, which is for people who experience little or no sexual attraction at all.
Is that it? I thought we were going to get a big explanation then and clear up all the confusion.
But no, I mean, it's a lot less interesting than it sounds, but it's often overlooked, not discussed. And I often find when we're having conversations about sexuality specifically, the asexual perspective is rarely included, and you're literally missing half of the discussion when you're not talking about that. So for someone like me, who spent the majority of my life not even understanding that asexuality was a thing, and you just go through life thinking, I'm a straight woman, or I'm not a straight woman, am I gay, I'm not gay, I don't really understand. And you go around this whole rigmarole of who am I attracted to? Why am I attracted to them? And in the end, I settled upon the fact that I just love people's brains. And that was what I was attracted to. There was just a thing about a person. And then it wasn't until I discovered asexuality that I was like, oh, Christ, there it is. This is the thing. Because actually, I fall in love with people, and I don't care what gender they are. So I consider myself to be pan-romantic. I just don't get the same urges, it turns out, as everybody else to want to get jiggy.
And that's the thing. You can be romantically attracted to them without having to be sexually attracted to them.
Yeah.
Again, two completely separate things, aren't they?
So for those people getting confused, because I know they will be there, what's the difference between romantically attracted and sexually attracted?
Do you want to put your bits together or not?
There are people out there saying that, though. How can you be romantically attracted to somebody if you don't then want to get jiggy?
So, I mean, intimacy for me takes many other forms, and actually, to be completely frank, and hopefully nobody wants me saying this, but not all asexual people do not have sex. It's not the same as celibacy. So there will be asexual people who will have sex. It's just that the attraction piece, the urge, the kind of the drivers won't manifest in the same way. Consent is a very clear thing in terms of you can consent to want to do something, and it doesn't have to be driven in the same way. So I think there's not just assuming and deciding that, you know, people are asexual people, they're clearly robots that don't know how to love people. It's not that. It's just a different way of experiencing sex.
Yeah.
It's a really good way of explaining it. Thank you. We are almost on time. We're going to have these all through the month, everyone. So please do tune in. And we've got Pam in the comments.
Can we do a shout out for the pluses?
Yeah, we can.
We
just
got
2
to A.
seconds.
Can we do?
Yeah, we can, because I also want to bring in Pam, which is part of the plus, which is where I was going. Pam, yes, it is going to be, well, you can still catch it on all the channels. It will sit there as well as on YouTube. So let's go on to the pluses. And can we just do a focus on Pan? Because I was going to bring that in, and people will be thinking, Pan romantic? What does that mean? Does that mean she fancies the god of the forest? What is it?
I mean, maybe. Yeah. No, so yeah, just the plus is just the term that is used, to incorporate everybody else who has not got the recognition of a letter. So it is just acknowledging that there are many other sexualities, genders, romantic preferences, all of these things that are happening in here that, you know, that don't get acknowledged in exactly the same way. So yeah, so pan, there is pansexual and panromantic in the same way there is asexual and aromantic. So if someone was aromantic, it just means that they would not feel romantically attracted to other people, as opposed to pan, which is me, who doesn't care what gender people are. I'm all in. And then pansexual is the same. So doesn't, you know, I think it's in Schitt's Creek, isn't it, where David does a really brilliant description of you know, he fancies the wine, not the label. And that's kind of what pansexuality is. It's you know, being attracted sexually to a person, don't really care, you know, how they identify, what their gender is, or what their sexual preferences are, so long as it's them.
And to confuse matters more, a lot of people, I'm sure, and I used to be one of them, when we hear the term bisexual, go bi too, so that's either or. But of course, it's not that black and white for a lot of people. It's not that cut and dry. There are a lot of people who identify as bisexual, and they mean exactly that they could be attracted to anyone, but they might be slightly more attracted to one gender or identity than another. They might not. It might be across the board. So if somebody tells you they're bisexual, don't automatically assume that it means they just fancy men and women equally. It doesn't always work that way, and it's not always just two.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean all as well. That's the other thing. If someone, like you point there, if someone says they are pansexual, it doesn't mean they fancy everybody, in the same way that if you are heterosexual or straight, you don't fancy every man or every woman. It doesn't work that way. There is still the attraction level. You still have
taste, isn't there? You still have to have taste.
Which is perhaps a bit of a tongue-in-cheek discussion. Yeah, that might be a nice little tongue-in-cheek discussion for one of our other shows as well, because how many of you here, when you've come out to someone, have had a question around whether you've ever fancied them? Or one of those bizarre reactions where people will suddenly start flirting horrendously, or in my case, suddenly talking about cock a lot. I love penis. I really love penis. Yes. And let me talk about penis. Oh, really? Tell me more. Yeah. Bizarre reactions when you come out. Has anybody else experienced that? Just really bizarre reactions?
Yes.
I haven't had that.
You're not alone.
Yeah. And it does seem to be that, doesn't it? Either a flirt like hell, or just talk about dick for the rest of the day.
What a way to end, Taz.
But trust me, those things are overrated. They're so yesterday.
Okay, so my goodness, we've been on for an hour already. So let's just do a quick round the room. Let's do a closing statement from everyone. A thought you would like to leave people with before we rejoin. When's the date of our next one? Who can remember, rather than me look it up in my calendar?
16th?
Everybody looks at calendar. I think it's the 16th.
I think it's the 16th at 4:30.
Yes, next Friday at 4:30 p.m. Excellent. So we will be back. So, Katie Allen, thank goodness we have an alphabetical order.
Yes.
What's
so I guess
thought for you?
my takeaway thought is this, and I'm gonna build on kind of Katie Neeves' invitation to ask anything. And I think that when we meet again next Friday, please ask us anything, because as you can see, this is a safe space where we will be honest and we will have a laugh, and don't have fear, because this is the thing, isn't it? Right? We all get worried about saying the wrong thing, putting our foot in it. There's a lot of fear. Let's use this opportunity. Let's not have the fear. Let's just have a laugh and learn some stuff, because I've enjoyed this immensely.
It's been great, isn't it?
Thank you. Katie B.
I love that, Katie Allen. I would say my takeaway thought, outside of asking us questions ahead of a week on Friday, if you want to show support to your colleagues in the office and you are too frightened to do it in any outward way, please just put what your genders are on your email signature or your LinkedIn profile. And maybe that's something we can talk a bit more about on, so your preferred pronouns. I don't know why I'm saying genders, your preferred pronouns, because I think it's a really nice way of saying I'm an ally without making a big deal of it. And if that's the most comfortable thing you can do, it's a really good start.
Brilliant, thank you.
Yeah.
Katie Neeves.
I just want people to know that trans people are just ordinary people who want to be happy. That's it.
Absolutely. I think that goes for all of us, isn't it? We're just ordinary people trying to live our lives in the best way that we can, and harm as few people as possible on the way and help as many as we can as well. So, as everyone else has said, if you have any questions, please do just drop us a line. You can put a comment on any of these. You'll find it on, if you search Taz Thornton on LinkedIn, YouTube or Facebook, you'll find it there. I'm going to make the recording available for everyone else in the group as well, so if they want to share somewhere they can, or we can all share it onto our own channels from here. We could put it everywhere, but StreamYard only lets me share to 3 different destinations. So let's just be the best we can. And if there is something that you want to ask and you're just worried, and most of the time when people don't want to ask, it's because they're scared of getting it wrong and scared of getting a load of shade. We're not going to do that. But if you're worried about asking something publicly, I'm sure we will all allow you to message any one of us individually. And if you want to be anonymous, then we will happily take your question to the next episode, and again, not tell anyone who asked. So the agenda here, I think, is just to help and to heal and to educate and to just make this world a little bit kinder for everybody, really. Wouldn't that be great?
Certainly would.
So thank you to everybody. Yes, we've got some stuff coming up. Yes, I get asked about pronouns a lot, so let's definitely tackle pronouns in our next episode. My goodness, the comments are still coming in thick and fast. Keep commenting even if we've gone off air. I'm going to end the broadcast now. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. All the Katies, if you stay on air for a minute, we'll have a quick wrap up before we log off properly. To everyone else who's watched, thank you. Please add a comment everywhere. It helps the social channels to keep showing this to more people. If you feel able to and brave enough, please share it with your audiences as well. If you believe we've been putting out some messages that could do some good, then let's get them out to the world. Thank you so much, everybody. We'll see you next Friday. Mwah! Happy Pride.
Bye.
Bye.
Happy Pride. Bye.